Good morning and welcome to the joint May 12th meeting of PlanRVA. Well, how are you?
Excuse me.
Good to see everybody this morning. Welcome. And I want to welcome for our first time Mr. Adkins from Charles City County, who's joining us electronically this morning. Welcome, Mr. Adkins. Can you hear me, Mr. Adkins? You might be on mute, but I just want to make sure you can hear me. Now he's off mute.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you. And I'm
Yes,
going to
sir.
meet close to this.
Very good. All right, this time I'm going to ask Ms. Fry to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. And we'll proceed to roll call.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Morning.
Great. All right. Dr. McGraw,
Here.
Miss Abbott, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Atkins,
Here.
Chair Winslow,
Here.
Mr. Holland, Mr. Carroll,
Here.
Miss Haley, Mr. Engel,
Here.
Miss Fry,
Here.
Mr. Davy,
Here.
Mr. Sharp,
Here.
Mr. Spoonhour, Mr. Davis, Mr. Peterson,
Here.
Miss Pritchard, Mr. Whitaker,
Here.
Mr. Waddell,
Here.
Reverend Nelson, Miss O'Bannon,
Here.
Mr. Thornton,
Here.
Miss Thornton,
Here.
Mr. Baca,
Here.
Miss Page,
Here.
Mr. Lockwood, Miss Pearson,
Here.
Mr. Byerly,
Here.
Mr. McClung,
Here.
Mr. Hall,
Here.
Dr. Newbill,
Here.
Mr. Addison, Miss Lambert, Miss Lynch, Miss Robertson, Mr. Poole, and Mr. Giovia. And a quorum is present.
Thank you very much. All right, at this time, we have our public comment period. If there's any members of the public who would like to provide 3 minutes of commentary, we certainly hear that now. That's, I don't see anyone here. I don't hear anyone, so we'll move on. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda before us? I have a motion. Second. Ms. O'Bannon. Second, Mr. Carroll. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Wonderful. We are now on page 2 of our packet with meeting minutes, and just wanted to make certain that these minutes have been read by everyone and had an opportunity to make any amendments or changes. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
move approval of the minutes as written.
Mr. Waddell, I have a motion and a second from Ms. Page. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great. All right, Executive Committee and Chairman's report. We have had a very busy couple of months. There have been a lot of activities taking place. For those of you, I just want to say, for those of you who are not connected on LinkedIn or on Facebook to PlanRVA's pages, you will get a more in-depth view of what goes on from a day-to-day basis. There are a lot of good events and webinars and things that they are doing all the time to advance our various causes. And so I would encourage each of you to do that. There, of course, has been a lot of time spent on our upcoming office move and the finances associated with that. And as several of you in this room can attest more closely to. But we are locked and loaded and headed toward our annual joint meeting, which I'll just mention now, June 2nd, 2022, the first ever meeting of PlanRVA, the TPO, and CVTA. And my understanding from Martha is that the Secretary of Transportation, Shep Miller, may be joining us. And so we're waiting for final confirmation on that. But that's certainly great coordination to have that the Secretary in on these, these sorts of discussions in a more intimate fashion than perhaps in years past. So it's always good when the right hand's talking to the left hands, and so on. So just mention that again, June 2nd, 9 to 11 at the VDOT Richmond District Office, 2430 Pine Forest Drive in South Chesterfield. And Mr. Carroll was talking this facility up mightily, so we expect big things down there.
It'll blow you away.
Very good. With that, unless there's, and we'll get to our executive director's report here, but Mr. Holland is not here, but to provide the Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee report, but perhaps someone else could walk us through that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The committee did meet on April 24th, and the purpose of that meeting was to review the quarterly financials for the third quarter and also to review the FY 2023 budget. Mr. Van Dornick is here, I think down at the end of the table there, who can answer any questions, but the committee did recommend acceptance of the financial statements for the third quarter, continue to have a good year, and are tracking ahead of where we projected this year to date. I will defer to you, Dan, to kind of get into the detail of why that is and what might be a reasonable expectation for the rest of the year.
Okay. The operating results, page 13 of your package, is the summary statement. The total year-to-date net surplus is $113,000, and $105,000 of that came from the third quarter. So a very significantly profitable quarter. That is not unexpected, given that the months of January, February, and March are the most productive as far as staff time. There are far fewer holidays, far fewer vacations. So staff is here to produce, therefore we can bill that revenue and accrue that revenue. And that's the primary driver for that. The expense levels are pretty flat, not a lot of fluctuations. In fact, most of the annual expenses are actually paid in the first quarter. So that's part of the dynamic there. If you look further on page 15, in the top block of accounts, you'll see 6101 leave wages. And if you follow that line all the way across, you'll see that January, February, and then especially March only had $4,606 allocated to any type of leave. That's sick, vacation. Again, there's no holidays in March. But you can kind of see how that number flows very specifically with the bottom line number of net surplus. As far as the remainder of the quarter, or the remainder of the year, sorry, I don't have my pages in order. If you look at page 11, you'll see another summary statement with a couple of different groups of columns. The far left column is the fiscal 22 total year to date, which is what you saw in the financial report. The fiscal 22 budget column is what was passed last June. And then the far right side of columns is a projection for fiscal 22. There's no request to actually update the budget or anything like that. We just took a second look at where we thought we were going for the end of the year. And you see that we're actually projecting a surplus of $135,000. So that is about $7,000 a month, April, May, and June, which is less than what we've been trending. But again, we have that dynamic of time off, staff productivity, vacations, holidays, those types of things will be ticking back upward. So again, it's an expected trend, it's an expected change. So all in all, projecting $135,000 when the original budget was expecting about, I think, 0 to 1,000 is a successful or a profitable year. And most of that is due to staffing and productivity, billing precision, those types of changes.
Stan?
Prompt any questions from commissioners? Well, is there a motion to accept this financial statement for the third quarter?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Move it for audit.
Move it for audit. Thank you. That's a friendly, very good. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, Martha. New office space update.
Thank you. The Finance Committee will meet on May 24th. The purpose of that meeting, we didn't spend very much time at all on the last committee meeting talking about the office space, but we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the new office space at the next meeting. I was able to sit down with the architects yesterday and do a page turn on the plans. And so as soon as we get the electronic copies of those up-to-date plans, we'll get that out to the committee to review. We are working to be able to complete the construction documents over the next 10 days. So that'll be kind of critical to hit that deadline so that we can continue to meet our timeline on releasing the bid documents to go out for construction contractors. So as of right now, we're continuing to kind of monitor what's happening in the market as far as building materials and whatnot. I shared with the executive committee this morning that we are incorporating some ad alternatives in the bid documents for the construction so that we can take advantage, quite frankly, of what the fluctuations might be in different materials. So I use the example, we learned yesterday that the framing that goes around windows and doors in the interior of our space, we had originally planned and spec'd that to be the hollow metal material. But it turns out that right now, anyway, aluminum is pricing more favorably than hollow metal. So we're going to include the aluminum as an ad alternative so we can take advantage of those types of pricing. So we are going to see more, quite frankly, of those ad alternatives incorporated into the construction documents than I originally anticipated. But the reason for that is to be able to evaluate that pricing. We are looking at kind of a blended budget approach for this. So in front of house, if you will, the areas where we're going to be receiving guests, hosting you all, those kinds of things. We've got a little bit of kind of a different material set than we're doing in back of house. Certainly do not want to project that we're doing anything that's low quality in the back of house, but we are trying to be realistic about traffic and utilization and that kind of thing. So using laminate countertops in certain areas strategically over maybe the more costly solid surface to make sure that we're kind of taking advantage of that. So I would say all is going well. We're on schedule still. When the Finance Committee meets on the 24th, they'll be reviewing the budget for the project. We are continuing to stay in the total budget, but they're going to be reviewing the line item budgets and how we've had to make accommodations for the obligations that we've made thus far and what the implications are of that down the line. We're looking very closely at furniture and where we can provide savings. That was the second most costly component of the budget, other than construction, which, as you know, we don't have as much control over. So we're just kind of trying to make those make those maneuvers internally so that we can hold into the budget that we committed to. Trying to think what else. But yeah, everything has been going well according to plan, and committee will be busy in 2 weeks taking a look at everything that we have happening so far. I'm certainly happy to answer questions if I've skipped over anything.
Commissioners, any questions? Please, Ms. Savannah.
You mentioned we're still on target for a moving date, because that, I know with having to change materials or
Yes.
you're not being able to get.
I don't have an update on any changes to the timeline on that, really until we get that construction bid material back and they give us a feel for what their construction schedule can be. That's where we'll see any accommodations that need to be reviewed. So not the May meeting when the committee gets together, but I think when you get together in June, it's a 3-week bid period. So when the committee gets together in June, that's the thing I'd like for you guys to focus on and kind of evaluate. At that point in time, we'll also be able to start making those decisions that we need to make about what our contingency planning is for after October 31, which is our scheduled move out date. So I've been pulling together the requested material on what the options are as far as holdover here, or if we do a kind of a hybrid situation with staff going remote and we host our meetings offsite and I'll have options for you to consider.
Comments?
Quick
Yes.
question. We are bidding this as a fixed cost, agreement.
Yes.
Any other comments, questions?
If I can,
Please
just
do,
as
yeah,
I do want to say, thanks. We've gotten a lot of support from Chesterfield's procurement department in kind of navigating this.
We'll send you a bill.
Please don't.
I'm just kidding.
But she really, truly has been really great to work with, so thanks for that. And then also with the city's permitting department, that we've gotten just a tremendous amount of support from the city, from various departments. I didn't really even realize how excited they were about us moving to this location, and so day of phone calls, let's get on the call on the phone and talk about this and everything. So just wanted to let you all know that we're getting really great support from our partners as we move through this process.
All right. We have our annual budget.
Thank you. I'll just lead off and then turn it over to Mr. Van Dornick to present the budget, and Mr. Holland, certainly if you want to add comments, I'd love to have that. But I'll start with saying that both the Finance Committee and the Executive Committee did take action to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2023 budget as presented. I would say just to commend Dan on the work that he's done to be able to put this in a new format for you, and I think he's going to walk through a little bit of that to orient you, but I'm really pleased with the way that we are able to examine the components of our budget much more specifically and discreetly, not only for reporting purposes to you, but from a management perspective. It's going to really help to be able to evaluate what levers we need to pull throughout the year to stay on track. In addition to that, the Executive Committee has spent a couple of sessions talking about the budget opportunities that we have in the coming fiscal year to be able to address salary and compensation. And I think over the last several months, we've had a lot of discussion about different ways that we need to make sure that we're supporting our employees, not just through compensation, but other types of recognition. So I heard that loud and clear and did come forward with a proposal or request for this budget to incorporate salary increases for staff. We have two components built into the program. One is for employees that have achieved their 6-month successful probationary period, they would be eligible to receive a recommended 5.9% salary increase. That's based on the cost of living that was published in January of this year. And then we also did incorporate a $20,000 pool for an additional increase subject to our budget holding through the end of the second quarter, where our supervisors would be able to recommend an additional one-time salary increase in the form of kind of like commonly called like a bonus that could be awarded based on recommendation from supervisors. So we're pleased that we've been able to incorporate that into the budget for this fiscal year, and I think Dan's going to talk a little bit more about how this new format enabled that to be, but wanted to just sort of share some of those priorities first and foremost. Dan?
Starting on page 17 of your package, The first column to the left is the fiscal 23 recommendation. This is the budget that's been recommended by the Finance Committee and by the Executive Committee this morning. The middle set of columns are your original budget and the projection for this fiscal year. And then the far right column is the difference between the fiscal 23 recommendation and the fiscal 22 projection. If you go down that first page, you'll see that revenue is projected to increase at each level, federal, state, local. The next page, even slightly in private revenue, for a total revenue increase of $542,000. This is driven by a couple of factors. The first actually being by the 5.9% COLA salary increase. Salaries, the way that the organization is funded, it's by reimbursable grants primarily. So of that increase, about 80% of it will be billed to grantors. And so there's actually about slightly less than 80% of that will actually be returned in revenue, just based on the formulas of how the grants work. So that's where the primary driver is for the revenue increase. The second thing we did was to actually look at all of the grants, the budget, all the money available, look at where the time is spent to figure out where should all of staff time be spent, what is the most strategic, what is the best leverage on the funding. And so we were able to actually put people's time and make sure that was defined properly into the different programs, lines of businesses that we run here, and get the best return on that time from a financial perspective. So continuing down, you see that there's actually an increase of $394,000 in the salaries and wages area. That's comprised of two pieces. About $120,000 of that is actually the COLA increase, and the rest of that is staffing. There were a number of positions that were open. There were 2 positions were vacated in the early part of fiscal 22 that weren't filled until the last quarter of fiscal 22, so you had greater than 6 months vacancies. I also had a couple of positions that were projected for the entirety of fiscal 22 that were just, filled, May 1st. So where you have in fiscal 22 projection is the actual staffing level that occurred. Fiscal 23 is actually a full staffing level. So you have a full investment in the staff. And to carry a theme through, staff is where the financial generator is for the organization. They produce the work, which is what the grantors, the funding sources, are reimbursing the organization for. So there's a very, very tight relationship there between how well the staff is deployed and how productive they are throughout the year and the overall financial returns to the organization. So moving on from that point, you see on page 19, I guess one thing to note that if you compare this format to what we've been reporting, the account numbering and the account structuring is a little bit different. And we did that going into fiscal 23 so that we can actually analyze the varying costs that are incurred in the organization. And that impacts how you get reimbursed by your grantors. So we have a separate salaries and wages pool, which is reimbursed directly. But then we also have a fringe benefit pool, which is reimbursed by a formula that gets approved, audited by VDOT. And that's actually applied to the wages. So you don't get reimbursed directly for your fringe benefits in each given year, but there's a percentage based on the prior year's reimbursement. So it's important to keep that group of expenses understood, because you're getting reimbursed based on a prior year's basis, but you're expending it this year's. You need to make sure you understand how they're coming together. Direct cost pool, these are costs that go directly to grants. This is another refinement, another point of precision in managing the grants. Instead of just putting them into a general pool that may or may not get reimbursed, the diligence is being applied to make sure that they get applied to the grant that's directly applicable to one of those programs.
Can I ask a question? In the direct cost pool is, looking at meeting expenses, is that meetings that we have or that staff has? Because I'm just wondering. Is that, which one is it? Just looks like the other, you have legal fees, which of course would be across both. And
Yeah, in the direct cost pool, you'll see in legal fees, there was $5,000 in the current year's budget, but there is zero in the fiscal 23 budget.
right.
Contracted services, that advertising, mission advancement, those are all part of the actual grants, the programs that you run. You'll see that better in the next statement that I have. But that's the difference between the direct cost pool and the pool that comes next in the 7,000 series, the indirect. The direct ones are directly attributable to each of the programs. So if there's a meeting for the MPO, that gets assigned directly to that program, gets directly reimbursed by that program grant.
I mean, the meeting expenses line 6455, are those meeting expenses for the board here, or is that meeting expenses for your employees?
No, that line specifically is for transportation programs, so that's the CVTA meeting expenses and the TPO meeting expenses. And then when you go down, as Dan was saying the next page on line 7455.
That's on page 21.
Thank you. That $12,000 in administration are the other meeting expenses that are incurred for PlanRVA meetings, but they're not staff activities. They're hosting other events and meetings that we have throughout the year.
But so 7,400 staff, I'm just asking, 7,400 is staff development, so I'm assuming those meeting expenses are for staff. No? I'm just trying to figure out which
it's a
line
mix.
is which meeting.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. We might want to differentiate those. That isn't, I see what you're saying. It's categories and staff development, but it actually is also expenses for meetings that we're hosting externally. So we might want to take a look at breaking that out.
Which one is it? Which one? I'm just asking because
It's a blend. So
meeting expenses under direct cost pool at 6455, and then meeting expenses for staff development, which I was assuming it was some meetings they go to with staff has to be there. I just want to know what area. All right, I wanted to try to understand how much these meetings cost that we attend.
I think we need to go back through and differentiate, because I think that 12,000 figure is a combination of staff meeting expenses and non-reimbursable external meeting expenses. Am I right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I think we need to do some digging to get the answer to your question.
Well, I ask it that way because in the past, when we had these meetings years ago, not too long ago, they would start at 10 o'clock and lunch would be served, and it was very expensive, and we cut that as one of the costs to cut. So the meeting expenses under staff development, $12,000, I'm just trying to figure out, what exactly, is that just staff, and are they having to drive somewhere, or, whatever, and is that covered? What's covered in that? But just the other one that says, meeting, where is it, under Fringe, where did I put it? Oh, no, it's under direct cost. I'm just trying to figure out, because now we've cut the cost, you serve coffee. And that may sound like it's just a minor expense, but it can be
Yes,
pretty, like $30,000 a year or something, so.
it's not that much.
But
You got some cheap coffee, good coffee.
No, I'm saying that because that's one of the things we have done to help cut expenses, is lunch is not served anymore, and we've changed the hour of the meeting.
Yes.
We've worked on trying to keep costs down, that's all.
Yes.
I just saw both of them and I thought, well,
That's the difference.
before we could kind of judge how much the food costs, for instance, I mean.
So the total would be the 16,400, the two lines that you're
Right.
describing together, that would be the total. 4,400 of that is directly allocable to the transportation programs. And the 12,000 that you see below is not allocable to any programs. Largely that's because when we host staff meetings or meetings of the Emergency Management Alliance or other groups where we might bring lunch in or those kinds of things, those aren't allowed. So that is what it includes
Okay.
though, yeah.
And the other thing that was not renting a location, but I know you would not, you'd ask Chesterfield if they had a location, or the city if they had another location, if we were gonna meet.
We
As
try
we just
very
talked
hard
about,
not
so.
to pay fees for locations,
That's all.
yeah.
I was just curious as what that was totally.
Mr. Peters.
I just want, just a point of clarification as far as the report is. All the items, as I understand it from the 6,000 items are items that we're gonna get reimbursed for. All the ones in the indirect later is ones we have are part of our operations.
So they are reimbursed, but they're indirectly reimbursed. So, Dan, I don't know if you want to tackle that, but.
They
I
go into a
understand, but
pool
they are
that's applied as a
paid
percentage.
for through.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Through a percentage.
where the others are just part of our overhead.
Yep, through a percentage, that's correct. Mr. Peters, that's correct, no problem.
Another question. Mr. Chair.
Other question? I'm sorry, please, Mr. Waddell.
Ms. Peterson's question opened another for me, and this goes to staffing and billability. Staff members, when they're on a project, they are billing to that particular project, and when they're non-billable, that salary and wages come out of a different account.
That's correct. I can actually answer that question more directly when we get to the next statement.
I apologize for
No,
skipping ahead.
it's an excellent question,
Thank you.
but it's more visible in the next group.
Thank you.
Dan, why don't you do that?
Okay. So just to finish page 21, the budget comes to 0. So it's a break-even budget. Starting on page 22, this is where another level of information is available to us. Broke down the organization into what we call lines of business, the types of services that we have. And they are at the header of your columns. Administration, that's the general operation of the organization. And then 6 specific areas where we have, specific programming and specific funding sources. Looking across the top, the far right column, transportation, that includes the MPO and CVTA. That's the most significant program, the most resources, most revenue. But you can see through the other columns, just, where's the funding coming from? Which program can support themselves. If you look at the very bottom of page 22, in that bottom group, 4,400 private revenue, you'll see the line 4,900 revenue distribution. Most of our grants require a local match. The MPO program, it's 80% federal, 10% state, and then 10% is out of the local budget. 2 of the other grants have a similar arrangement. This is where we actually record that local match. So in the budget, $276,000 general PlanRVA funds are dedicated to these other grants as part of the funding structure. So you'll see that $182,000 of it is already dedicated to the MPO. The environmental programs also have significant match requirements. So even just to get into those programs, the local funding sources need to be allocated there. You see that the local sources are the state appropriation and local membership dues. Get back to your question on the top of page 23. salaries and wages. All salaries and wages projection for the year is $1,950,000. Of those allocated will be $1,930,000. The difference is the $20,000 bonus pool, because we don't know where that's going. So you'll see the different ways in which they get allocated. They get allocated to program primarily. Part-time staff gets allocated on its own. And then administrative wages. That's, to answer your question, that's where any staff time that goes to the general operating of the organization, that's where that time gets assigned. And so that's, an important number to keep track of because that comes out of your general revenues. The more time that staff, and that includes all of staff, executive director, and directors of programs, the more that they can actually assign their time to actual reimbursable programs, that gets allocated to those lines of businesses, and then that's eligible for the reimbursement. So that's part of the precision that's been going on to get a better leverage on your finances and get your staff reimbursed. Does that answer
Succinctly.
I think this line of business budget, I just want to say, I love this format. I think this provides a lot of clarity for us as, this body is looking at where time is being spent, how resources are being allocated. So I really appreciate this document. I'm saying that again for the executive, but sorry, I'm saying it twice. Mr. Waddell.
I agree with your comments, Mr. Chairman, on the format. It makes it easier. I just didn't look that far. It got real late last night, and I don't use coffee. Got a question on grants. Federal and state funds, do they come first and then we go searching for the 10%, or how does that work? And why I'm asking is Friends of Lower Appomattox River 4360. To key on that for a second, did we have federal and state funds and then we task staff to find something that would satisfy that criteria? Which came first, the horse or the cart here? Does that question make any sense?
The 74,950, that's a grant that is for a specific purpose. There's no other arrangement
Okay,
regarding those particular funds.
so we found 90% in the
Well, that particular grant isn't a share arrangement. That particular grant is just for the services of one particular employee. And so that's part of the environmental program.
Okay, then on the other, the 90 and the 10, do we then go looking for, or do we have in the hopper a lot of programs that will match or fit the criteria?
Well, that's part of the opportunity that's available by looking at the structure of the finances this way. The 80-10-10 split that we talk about with the MPO program, it's the easy, the major one is, I think, the easiest one to follow. By entering into the agreement to receive the federal and state funds, the localities have committed that 10% already. So it's not a first, second, third, it's all at once. To get 100%, the localities have to commit 10%. That 10% is allocated out of those funds that you see in the administration line. So when you look at local membership dues or the state appropriation, that's where those funds are really assigned, is to fill that local match requirement, that 10%.
So there's no situations where we have to give back?
In my understanding, what you're saying by give back, I don't think so.
Because we don't have a matching program.
Well, it's matched by funds owned by the PlanRVA.
They commit once we demonstrate
The ability to fill that, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I just to jump on the commendations, this format helps us to be able to see what dollars we have available to go after new opportunities. Previously, we didn't have the ability to very clearly see what our capacity would be to match additional grants. So this is really kind of a significant step in that process. I think just so We don't want to over obligate ourselves by seeking out new grant opportunities, but this helps to make sure that every dollar is accounted for in that system of matching.
Any other questions on this?
One more thing to highlight.
Please.
In the middle of page 23, you see the fringe benefit pool. Focusing on that far left column, administration, you see that it actually totals a negative $40,000. What that means is that we're actually allocating more in fringe benefits to the programs than we're actually incurring. And how that occurs is that the fringe benefit reimbursement is based on the historical rate, not the current year's rate. So given the staff time and wages that are being incurred to programs, it's actually bringing in a little bit more money to the organization based on that percentage formula. That's not something that actually recurs. It's one of those important cost identifiers to keep your eye on, because you can get into trouble when those rates shift, when you're starting to incur more in the current year than you're getting reimbursed. So that's why this format change and actually keeping track of how those allocations work, keeping those costs separate, not waiting until the audit to actually make those calculations. Bottom of this page, 6,000, you'll see, that's where all those direct costs are, primarily in the transportation program. And then page 24, this is that indirect pool. This is the general operations of the organization, everything from insurance to rent, audit, computer, staff development. And then on page 25, the very top, you again have another set of allocations across the different programs. And again, the way that is structured right now, there's more being allocated to the programs than are being incurred. But again, we need to keep our eye on that. The other thing to keep in mind is indirect costs being applied to the programs. Some of them are billed, not all of them actually go to reimbursable grants, but they still are part of the burden of that program. So we allocate that along. It's about a 80% difference. You'll see in that middle line, net operating loss, net operating income or loss, the bracketed numbers are losses. Most of our programs actually operate at a loss, even after being reimbursed by the grant match requirement. And so this also highlights potential financial pitfalls for the organization. You need to know kind of which programs need more support, which ones are there opportunities to maybe refine how we pursue revenues to go seek out special grant funds. And then in the very bottom set, we actually transfer from the general fund out to the programs to fill those holes. So you'll see that there's still $300,000 burden on all those general funds to fund the actual programs of the organization.
Mr. Peterson, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I have been sitting on the finance committee since Dr. Newville established it originally. And when we first started, when I would see these reports, I might as well have been reading them in Greek. So I do want to comment. This is such, I feel like it's in English now and I can understand it. So I want to compliment the changes and the vast journey we've traveled from then to now, and have to compliment the staff and our support for making these things happen.
Agreed. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, I think this is enormously intuitive, and for the public who follows this along too, as they take a look at these statements. So highly, highly good work here.
One more question, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thorpe. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Holland's my co-chair. You let me.
I'm making sure he sees.
No, go ahead,
For
Mr.
you.
Thorpe.
I was talking about for you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really looking at, and I applaud what's been done financially, these reports. But I want to be a little bit sensitive to another area that we touched, and that is staff. And it looks like we've done our due diligence on this report before that. I haven't heard anything about a word that's important to me. And so maybe someone can answer this. What about the morale? I would like to know something, if someone could just share with me, how is the morale of our staff? To me, for staff to continue to be productive, morale is important. And I think we need to know that.
Would you want her to address that under executive director comments and let us get this motion on the floor on the budget piece first? Would that be okay, Ms. Thornton? I don't want to steal any thunder. But let me do that. Is there a motion on the floor to?
Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee did meet and recommend to the Commission approval of the fiscal year 23 budget as presented, of course, with clarifications for Ms. O'Bannon, as she noted appropriately, and we're pleased to recommend approval of that. And I also would note too that one thing we requested and has come forth is the treasurer's information. We want a treasurer's report as well when we meet, know our funds invested, and also know the revenue that derived thereof. So with that, I make a motion.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to approve the 2023 annual budget discussion. Ms. O'Bannon.
Do we have an increase in the amount paid by local governments to meet this budget?
The increase is due to the population change by the jurisdictions. We did not do an increase to the assessment. The assessment rate remains at 55 cents per capita for the member dues. That's a great question. And the TPO assessment is still at 5 cents per capita. So the whole number increase is due to the local jurisdictions change in population.
I just wanted somebody else to make that clear.
Thank you.
A good question, very good question. Any other questions, comments on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? All right, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Davey for public outreach, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Heater so that she can answer Mr. Thornton's question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I will give sort of a brief update on sort of what we've been doing as a committee on two fronts, and then I'm sure Ms. Heater will have a lot more specifics about what staff is doing. But our committee was able to meet last week and get an update on two things. One of those things were a lot of the staff priorities that came out of the community engagement strategy. And you'll see that whether you're visibly out with staff or whether you see the reports that I see, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's really, really cool to see what staff has been doing because obviously the community engagement strategy suggested that we hire staff to do exactly what they're doing. So on the staff side, it's exemplary work, from my opinion, about really what's going on to really go ahead and raise the awareness and be more engaged in the community. The other part of the community engagement strategy was to use this bench of resources that we have, which are, I think, some of the best brand strategists and engagement strategists in the region. And we've got a pool of consultants that we're using. One of the first deliverables you saw a presentation on 2 months ago, where we actually talked about the brand strategy itself. I thought it's awesome work. I know Kelly's O'Keefe and his company very, very well, and I think their work was well received by the entire board. But one specific item in there was to go ahead and start getting the word out and actually go ahead and implement our communication strategy. And so that's really the next step that staff has taken, is to engage our bench strength to do an audit of sort of where our brand is out in the communications network, how we can actually strengthen that and align it with the overall outreach strategy and the brand strategy. So it's all sort of working for me. I'm an engineer. I love the strategy first and the execution second. And the execution's been exemplary, both in what staff's doing and what our deep bench is doing on our behalf. So over the course of April, May, June, and July is when the Hodges Partnership is out there sort of doing their work. And not only will they audit what's sort of going on, you're going to start seeing changes in how the brand strategy is being implemented in the communication strategy. So I think the update we got last week was awesome. As you guys consider, what you're interested in from a volunteer perspective, and you want to be part of a cool committee to actually sort of watch this sort of come alive, going into the fall. We could probably use some more help. And it's really not to go ahead and dictate the strategy. It's to hear and coach and empower staff to do what I think they're doing. They're doing exactly what we asked them to do. So that's my overall highlight on those two things. And I'm sure Martha may have some specifics in her report that I'd like to
Great, Mr. Waddell.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. To Mr. Davies' point, I just want to add that I was in the committee and was very impressed with the staff's accomplishments to the point there. I requested an electronic copy of what staff's doing. And to Mr. Mata's point, the swell of the salaries in the third quarter might be explained. Staff, there's a goal and action items, another goal, action items. They are working hard, getting the word out. I suggest, if y'all are interested, to get an electronic copy of what the staff is doing, because they're doing a yeoman's job of accomplishing the outreach that we need and meeting the goals of this organization. Thank you.
We can incorporate that communication that went out to the committee in the minutes from this meeting.
Without objection, yeah, please, yeah, we'll add that on there, yeah.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. I'm going to turn it over to Martha for her report, and if you would start with Mr. Thornton's question. He's been very patient with me.
Yes, thank you. Well, first, Mr. Thornton, you've been really great this year. I know you've come through the office a couple of times, and I will say that we've asked the staff what matters to them. And you know, I would not say, I don't think anybody would say that compensation isn't important, but it has definitely been made clear to me over and over again that our staff really appreciate the opportunity to interact with you all as commissioners. And I noticed even after the last board meeting, many of you walked down the hallway instead of just kind of going out to the hall out this way. So I wanted to share with you that I think our team really appreciates the opportunity to connect with you all. This is a group of people who care deeply about their community, and they love the work that they do. And I think that when they get to see their efforts turn into things that you all are excited about, it's like the best thing in the world to happen to them. So I think that we're coming off of a difficult 2 years, as are all of the public sector employees across the region. We have endured an incredible amount of change and adjustment, and I think we all learned the definition of flexibility in new ways, and this team has just been incredible in that. They've been at every turn coming up with solutions to problems and showing up when we need help, and you all have been here with us on our technology journey and those kinds of things, and it's just been really, really great. So I think that there's always improvement to be done in the way of morale. Gilbreth has been a new addition to our team, but has taken on the responsibilities of helping me bring more structure to the way that we engage with our staff. She's created a really wonderful set of programs to be able to acknowledge staff when they achieve a milestone or accomplishment, to recognize our staff when it's their birthday or if there is an anniversary or other kind of good news. We have in the more recent weeks and months been able to put together in-person activities for our staff, and our staff members are attending those, and they're voluntary and sometimes they're after hours, but it's been great to be able to see our team get together and kind of want to be together when they don't have to be. And the office space and just the ability to kind of get back together has, I think, been very motivating and encouraging for many of us. Our team is here on site every Tuesday and Thursday together intentionally so that we can continue to build that kind of camaraderie and teamwork. And many of the staff members are here even on the days that they're permitted to telework. They just choose to be here because it's better for them and for their work. So in my mind, those are all signs, these voluntary actions of staff, these are all signs that we do have a group of people that get up every day and look forward to what they've got to do. So I'm excited about that. We're going to be identifying ways to get our staff members in front of you more regularly. That's been a topic of conversation a couple of times with the executive committee so that you all can get to know our team a little bit better and you can hear directly from them about the work that they're doing. So we're going to be looking for those opportunities and just really appreciate the support that I've heard over the last, frankly, year or more from the board in support of our staff. And I know that it means a lot to them. So, yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Do you want to provide?
Yeah, I'll go on with some
Sure.
updates. I did just want to say, so from a work program, we're kind of in prep mode for next fiscal year right now. So at the June 2nd annual meeting, there will be one agenda item, presentation of the Unified Planning Work Program. This is the work activities that we plan to undertake for the transportation area next fiscal year. So that'll be on the agenda for that meeting. Our grants for the emergency management program will be due on June 13th. So we're working with our 25 member jurisdictions of the Emergency Management Alliance on coordinating letters of support for their local applications as well as what the regional applications will be submitted for this year. Environmental program grants were already in. They got submitted at the end of March, but they're scheduled to do the automatic renewal in October. And we did, as of yesterday, hear that we have expectation that the Chesapeake Bay TMDL program is going to be renewed in January of 2023. So that was frankly earlier than we normally hear. We normally hear in October or November. So that was really encouraging to know this soon that they plan to bring that forward. So things are moving along in that perspective. I did just want to share a couple of commendations. I mentioned this earlier. I think we've had a bunch of recognitions go through on Facebook, so I'm going to not hit them all. We do plan at the June 2nd meeting to really do a nice job of putting forward the acknowledgements and recognitions of our staff and our partners. So I won't steal that thunder for next month, but that's one of the things, I think, Mr. Thornton, directly to your question, we're trying to find ways to be able to get our staff, in front of you all and recognized for their work more regularly and frequently. Also, kind of with a look for next year, you're going to be hearing at that meeting about the undertaking to support scenario planning. We adopted the long-range transportation plan last October, and we are ready to start planning for the next one. So scenario planning is going to be a big part of the work program for next fiscal year. It is a whole staff effort, and the RFP for that consultant portion of that work will be going out later this month. So more to come at the June meeting to hear about that. We're also anchoring around that regional transportation conference that we plan for next spring. So the work to think about that and pull in our partners who will help host that will be starting this summer. Lots, as you heard, about coming forward with public engagement. Our new principal data manager started on May 2nd, Serene Adhikari. He comes to us from VCU Center for Urban and Regional Planning, and we're just really excited to have him on the team. He's going to be leading some of the efforts that you've heard about a little bit. Last month when we had the presentation in coordination with Partnership for Housing Affordability about the housing rehab opportunities, he'll be helping us with some data, the market value analysis that we talked about a little bit last month. He's also, we got a little engagement with Smart Beginnings Greater Richmond to do some work on early childhood education data. So he's already working to try to create that almost like entrepreneurial engine for data and research, which we're very excited about. So lots of things happening. We are really excited about what's to come and look forward to sharing with you the complete work program in July when the commission next meets.
Mr. Chairman,
Please, Mr. Ford.
I really appreciate your indulging me with that, but that's a question I think future commissioners need to always check on, as we don't want to conflate a number with the individual. And because the productivity of the staff is very important, which means also they need to know that we care about them and their sensitivity. So that was the reason I broached that. Thank you.
Very good comments as always, Mr. Ford. Any other updates, Ms. Heater, at this time?
As a reminder, the June, sorry, no, June 9th
June 9th.
commission meeting was canceled.
Right, thank you.
In anticipation of the June 2nd joint annual meeting, so we have that announcement. So we will reconvene this full body in July for the election of officers. So the nominating committee will be convening over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have the election of officers and the changing of the guard and the presentation of the work program. That's a little bit of a look ahead, and I think we typically ask the commission if what your pleasure is on August, so we can deal with that in July probably, but that's kind of a little bit of what's looking ahead.
Right, and I did receive a text from Mr. Davis, who's at Virginia Tech for his daughter's graduation, so we wish her and him the best on that today. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn unless there's further business to come before this body.
We don't even need to say a motion, if there is no.
Thank you, thanks, Ms. O'Bannon. Adjourn.
Nobody says it.